Hello. Have you ever wondered what an emotion coach does? Or perhaps if they could be of help to you? If so, you're in luck, because today I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Shakira, who is an emotion coach. Welcome, Shakira.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. So what is it that an emotion coach does? What do you do?
So, what I do is I help people understand and remember the power of their emotions and understand how these emotions can actually help them in life rather than hinder them, as it seems to be the general consensus these days.
Yeah, yeah. And when doing that, is it like counselling? Is that the type of thing it would be?
It can be similar in that there is a lot of talking. It's a talking form of therapy, let's say, and through talking help people understand why their emotions have been demonized, and how instead, if they pay attention to them, they can actually get a lot of understanding about their inner world. So someone who says, I don't know how to make decisions, or I'm not entirely sure who I am, or the life that I live doesn't feel like it's my own and I feel a bit lost.
Mm.
Looking at your emotions and understanding the way to look at your emotions can help you really find that center again for yourself.
Thank you. And this idea then, let's say if I came to you and I said, well, I'm not understanding what's going on. I'm feeling a bit lost. I'm experiencing these emotions or whatever. How do you tease that apart? Obviously, I know this isn't a real session, and it's maybe an unfair question, but I'm wondering where you would begin with that.
Well, I would begin with, first of all, trying to understand what it is that they feel, how they're feeling, what it is that they'd like to feel instead,
Ah,
why they feel like what they're feeling right now is wrong or bad. Find out what it is that in their life that is causing them to feel this way. And
right.
then we'd take off on a journey.
Okay, so that introspection then may unearth things that let's say it was me that I didn't realize that what is driving perhaps this feeling, these emotions, is something in the background that I wasn't necessarily aware of, and presumably by unearthing that, exposing it, shining some light on it, then even just at that point there are some insights.
Absolutely. I mean, someone who is very, very driven can come to me and say, I feel like I'm constantly chasing this like end result. And I can ask them, what does that end result look like? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, I haven't really thought about what it may look like. And just doing that, it helps them be able to pinpoint or decide whether or not what they're envisioning is actually what they ultimately want. A lot of us are working off a pattern that we've been given when we were children, essentially, of what, let's say, for example, the perfect relationship looks like. And so we believe that a relationship has to be long for it to be successful. And that doesn't really mean that that's the case. Just because you're together 50 years doesn't mean that it's a successful or happy relationship for both parties. But if we don't question what we think looks right, then we'll never be able to go, is that strictly speaking true that it's right? Or do I maybe want something different? Perhaps a lot of people think, oh, you have to be married in order to have a successful relationship. But who said that? It's not strictly speaking true. And it doesn't have to be true for everyone on the planet, because that makes very little sense. There's so many of us, we can't all be the same.
No, not at all. I mean, that is absolutely fascinating, and I can see immediately from like present day for me, it's definitely in the past, and thinking about other people who that if I could call it, and I know you may not call it this, but an emotional type thinking, that it's based on something that has never been examined, has never been shown, held up to the light to shine that sunlight on it, to sort of say, actually, what is this thing that you're chasing? It's kind of amorphous, and maybe it's made up. Maybe it's something from, as you said, childhood, for example, and yet we act as if it's true and chase whatever, presuming it to be true and good. And talking then about childhood, I know we've touched on this before when we've chatted, and since we've had some of those conversations, I've thought about it more and more. But your belief is that so much comes from childhood, both good and bad. Could you expand on that a little bit, please?
Oh, I mean, of course. When we come into this world, and this is not just me, and it's very well documented in the scientific world, but when we come into this world, we are inevitably dependent on the people around us, because we are completely reliant on someone else. We in the animal kingdom, as far as the rest of the animal kingdom is concerned, we are born useless and pathetic. A baby horse is ready to run within 30 minutes of being born. We take years before we even reach that stage. And obviously it's all to do with the anatomy, etc. But the human experience begins with being absolutely helpless and having no other choice than to be open to the new experiences around us, because we are a clean slate and we are entirely reliant on the people around us for our very own survival. So when, for our own survival, we realize that positive praise and positive results come from doing X, and that we get a less desirable or negative result from doing Y, we begin doing X exclusively because we see the positive from it. However, what we don't realize is that just because we did Y, there's nothing wrong with the fact that we did it. But the reaction that we got made us think that there was something wrong with it. Perhaps the adult in our lives didn't realize that the reaction that they had affected us so much, or they didn't realize that regardless, any action or choice you make at a very young age is perfectly valid, and all you need is a bit more guidance and emotional understanding. So what happens when we decide to do X all the time and completely reject the part of us that wants to do Y? We essentially create a split within us. We aim to only ever show and display X, and at the same time, we start suppressing the part that wants to do Y, so that never comes up again, so we don't get that negative reaction again. In the moment that we create a split like this, that is what we can call trauma. And trauma can very simply put, and these are not my words, but it can be defined as emotional distress without resolution. So if you look at it like that, you can understand that 1,000,001 things can cause trauma in a child, even in an adult, to be honest. So the younger you are and the more you realize that you cannot have a certain emotional resolution that creates repair rather than a fracture within you, that is when you start realizing, and as you go on, that you'll be faced with more and more opportunities and situations and scenarios where Y and the parts of you that wants to do Y gets brought up more and more, to the point where you realize I either go and look at this directly and figure out why wanting to do Y is such a bad thing, or you'll just keep on seeing this pattern where this need to face the part of you that wants to do this keeps on coming up.
That's, again, fascinating. And that, and looking at the why and figuring what that is, and is that something that you help people to do? Was that what could come up? Is that what people would understand?
Absolutely. And very often, obviously, you don't realize that it's something so small. I mean, you'll often find, like, even when you do this kind of work on yourself, because it's not entirely separate from doing it with someone else, you'll realize that the things that hurt the most as a child are not the really big thing, you know, like the things that are really obvious that are going to create like an obvious emotional distress. But they're actually the smaller things, like when you really wanted a doll and your parents said, no, you can't have that doll because whatever. And for some reason, that's what sticks more with you than something really big. And it obviously that's down to the individual, and we don't realize how much those scenarios affect us, what we made that scenario mean, because as human beings, we create meaning out of everything. So we can, you know, someone very special to you can give you a pen and you feel like that pen is really important, but it is in and of itself just a pen. But we've attached a meaning because of the person who gave it to us. So with all of that, I mean, it's fascinating seeing people connect dots for themselves when they're like, you know, like, oh, I've had this really big outburst when I was doing this. And I was like, when is another time that you felt like there was a big outburst while doing this? Oh, it's when I was a kid and, you know, my dad I didn't do this. And then they're like, right, and do you see the connection? You're like, oh my God, I didn't see it. But it's right there, but people need help in joining those dots. And when they see it for themselves, it's fascinating because they understand how they get to that point.
That's the word I was going to use. Fascinating. Absolutely. That's so interesting. Thank you very much for that explanation. And how do you work? Do you work? Do you do group sessions? Is it one-to-one? Do you do things in person, online?
I do in person and online.
Okay.
I can do groups, but I often work one-on-one. It
Right.
helps really focus and hone in on that one person.
Okay.
And they get a lot out of it as well. Obviously, group dynamics are much bigger, and I'd probably encourage them to do a one-on-one session anyway, so that I'd understand their point of view and where they're coming from and how they all fit into the wider group as well.
Thank you. Again, absolutely fascinating. Before we begin to wrap things up, have you anything that you would like to add or ask or whatever? I should also mention that we'll put contact details in the description for you.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I'd like anyone to know is that the emotions that you have are always valid. Even if someone around you thinks that you're being completely unreasonable in your outburst or in your reaction, the emotion you have is always valid, because you wouldn't feel the way you feel unless you had good reason. Now, where that reason begins and ends is a different question, but you always have a valid reason. That's not to say you're always right, but how you feel has a reason to exist within you the way that it does. So instead of thinking to yourself, oh, I want to not feel this, or I want to feel better, I would encourage people to actually take 5 minutes and allow themselves to feel whatever it is that they're feeling without wanting it to change. And when you get used to doing that, you'll actually realize that the emotion that you're having holds a lot of truths about yourself, and also about why you got to feel the way that you do. Emotions are layered, and they can come with visuals, they can come with a different memory or a sensation in the body, or they can come, you know, with a smell or a taste. You know, when you have your grandma's cake and it's just, oh, it throws you back. That is how an emotion exists. It's layered with all your 5 senses. So instead of trying to change the way you feel, try and understand the way you feel. And that's it.
I love that. Yeah, I really do. Shakira, I know you're busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I hope people get in touch. And also, I hope that whoever's watching and listening has found this, at the very least, interesting. Thanks, Shakira.
been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. Bye for now.
Bye.